So I don't think it's a mystery to most of you, but I love hymns. I'm not particularly wedded to this particular hymnal, but it is what I grew up with. It's what a lot of us grew up with. And there's something about singing the truths that we've learned in this book about God from some classic composers and wordsmiths that can really lift your spirits. You might find yourself going through the day and you're just humming along to some hymn that you're really familiar with. You might even be singing the words. My mom sung them all the time. Sometimes it was a little annoying, but she sung them constantly, and it was a way later in her life for her to deal with her chronic pain. And you could kind of tell the mood that she was in, and maybe you've had an experience like this in your own families where, if you could hear the kind of hymns she was singing or how she was singing the words, yeah, you could really tell how she was feeling at the time. So there's a certain hymn that I discovered in my adult years with some really gorgeous words, gorgeous at least to me, and we don't really sing it very often. Some of the older hymns, especially with older language, they either didn't make it into the cut in more modern hymnals, but they are what the church was established on. So this one is called Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, and it was adapted from a Quaker poem called The Brewing of Soma. So I just wanted to share some words from the hymn. So it says, Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind. In purer lives thy service find. In deeper reverence praise. In simple trust like theirs who heard beside the Syrian sea the gracious calling of the Lord, let us like them without a word rise up and follow thee. It's really pretty, that poetic art. There's modern poetry, but it's not quite the same as poetry from before. But as I mentioned, the hymn was adapted from a poem, this Brewing of Soma, and it was written by a Quaker poet named John Greenleaf Whittier, and it tells a story of ancient Vedic priests that would brew a drink called Soma. And it was an attempt, because when you drank it, you could experience what they felt was divinity. When word got out in the community about this drink, this soma, the whole population started to drink it. And they found that crippled old men would forget their pain, they'd run around like young men, and that the sick would laugh at their conditions. They'd be like, why was I even bothered by this before? I feel great. And everybody wanted that sacred drink, They wanted to feel like gods themselves. But Whittier describes this to be all in vain because the happiness of the people eventually became entirely dependent on their drinking soma. Now, they didn't actually have any power themselves. The drink didn't have any power. It just made you feel good. So they were basically drunk. That's what it was. And if they stopped drinking soma, they would lose all the effects. They'd go back to how they were before. Now, eventually, a person like that would come to hate their condition without the soma. They would do anything they could to get more soma, even if it wasn't good for them. So Whittier was trying to explain how he perceived Christians in the church of his day, that instead of seeking true power, God's power, they had settled for their own version of soma. A Christian could come to church every Sunday and be uplifted by the music, powerful prayers, maybe even the sermon. But if those things disappeared, if the way that you've come to understand church as it is right now disappeared, would you still act like Christians? What would make you Christian? What he saw in the church was a strange habit of almost trying to call heaven down on demand, which kind of is what we do in church, isn't it? It's like we're pushing the button on the remote and hoping that God is going to appear on demand so that the people might feel something. Something to carry you through your week or your hard times or all that. Because the feeling was really the most important thing to them. That's what he saw in the church. And this was a problem to him because if a Christian's entire experience of God was based upon how they felt in church, they would never find God. They would never come to an understanding of what the power of God was really like. All they would know was this. Now, we often read the stories of the Bible and we take note of the characters, right? We puff them up in our minds like superheroes. But many of us do this unconscious thing where we come to this conclusion like, we could never be like those folks. They're ideals, right? We strive to be like them, but we could never be them because maybe God gave them a special blessing. They were better than us in some way, holier. We could never reach their level. But if there is one thing that you need to get about who God is and what God does, it's this. God always shares God's power. That is who God is. God shares power. And our God is truly powerful. Many of us here have experienced that power on a personal level. But you have to ask yourself, why does God do that? Why does God choose to give us power, to free us, to save us? Why does this even happen? And what is all this power for? Is it just to feel good on Sunday morning? Or is it something far more? So the story from 2 Kings that you heard is the end of one story and the beginning of another. So the earthly ministry of the acclaimed prophet Elijah is about to come to an end. And he's not going to die. He's spared that. He's actually going to ascend to the heavenly realm, like Jesus, right? This man has walked with God and become intimately aware of the power of what God can do. He's seen it as he's ministered to people, as he's prophesied. It moves hearts and minds towards courage and justice. It strengthens us on difficult journeys and helps us to inspire people on their own dark paths. As you heard last week, it can perform miracles like calling down fire from heaven. And it can give us the courage to resist our fear when we know what we need to do, but maybe we just haven't found the courage to do it just yet. Now, Elisha, who is Elijah's traveling companion and his most devoted disciple, has seen and felt things on this journey with his master that caused him to want to follow this man, this Elijah, to learn everything that he can from him, maybe someday even become a prophet like him. But at this point in the story, he's coming to the realization that Elijah, he's not going to be around forever. And it's messing with his emotions. It's like he thinks like if he sticks close to Elijah's side, God won't come and just snatch him away. Every time someone says, hey, God's coming to take your master, he tells people, shut up, I don't want to hear that. Elisha had drunk the soma. That's what he had done. Elijah was his soma. If Elijah disappears, Elisha can't handle it. Never mind that Elijah was not special in any way. And I think if he was here in front of us right now, he'd probably say the same thing. Every single deed of power that he managed, every word of justice spoken, was the direct result of Elijah accepting the gift of God's empowerment, which is really just another way of saying, I'm here, God. Do what you need to do through me. That's it. He just said yes when God asked. Elisha's faith in God was not wrapped up in God. It was wrapped up in Elijah's presence in his life. Think of how many times you've idolized people in your life. You couldn't imagine what you would do if they left your side. Think about the impact it had on your life when they finally did leave your side, what it did to your emotions. Now you see this acutely when Elijah finally ascends to heaven on those beautiful chariots of fire. And Elisha is heartbroken. He can't be happy for his master, who is ascending to heaven on chariots of fire. This divine honor. He can't be happy for his master. God's taken him from me. And alone and unsure of what to do next, this young man picks up his mentor's mantle, and he does what his mentor did in front of that river Jordan when they needed to cross to the other side together. He took the mantle in his hand and he slapped the water with it. Now, when Elijah did it, he didn't say anything. This prophet just rolled it up, slaps the water, and the water parts. That's the kind of faith this guy had. No prayer, no mystical chanting, no magic words, just a slap. The waters would part. And Elisha yells, "Where is the God of Elijah? Where is the God of Elijah? Where is this God? Not where is my God? Where is the God of Elijah?" And God truly answers as God does, by sharing God's power. The waters part, just as they had done for Elijah. Elisha didn't slap those waters in faith. It could have been anger, could have been desperation, but God answered. Now you better believe that Elijah had done everything possible to teach this young student about the God that he knew and understood. Countless lessons, field education, all of this had been insufficient to help this young man find true faith in God. And I'm sure Elisha didn't take everything he was taught to heart, just like none of us did when we were taught as students. But let me tell you, and all the teachers in this room know this well, Elijah had done one thing right by his student. He had taught Elisha enough to at least try to slap the water with that mantle, to at least try, and call out to God when he did it, even if it wasn't the way that Elijah would have, even if it wasn't done in faith. He took the mantle, he called out to God, and he slapped the water. And that is more powerful than a sermon can explain to you. See, the world can be a dark and fearful place. That's not anything you didn't already know. It can take people you would expect to be strong, courageous, righteous people and break them down and turn them into something awful. There are plenty of people out there questioning the existence of this God that we're worshiping each and every week, because how could the world be so messed up if this all-powerful God is so good, right? The church exists to remind people that God is present in dark places, offering power beyond ourselves and calling on us to do something with it. To explain to people that they don't have to stay in that house with a person that beats them every day, that there's a life apart from their abuser. That addiction is not forever, and that freedom from it begins with just one brave step. That just because people with power can mess with the lives of those without doesn't mean that there isn't a God in heaven working to set things right again, maybe even including us in the process, like an activist leaving jugs of water for people on the border, or the undocumented immigrant speaking a prophetic word at a social gathering only to be snatched up by ICE hours later. Or men and women in Manhattan, tired of being treated like animals because of who they choose to love, and begin fighting for their right to simply exist in peace as happened in Greenwich Village the weekend of June 28, 1969, during the Stonewall riots. The church, like Elijah taught Elisha, can help folks find the God that makes all things possible. Maybe they're not going to get every lesson you teach them. Maybe they won't obey every rule. But at the very least, they can learn to take a chance on faith and the power that God provides. As Lao Tzu said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And the church exists, and we can teach people to take that one step in the right direction. I want you to think back on the people that took the time to share faith with you, to help you to find it for yourself. Everybody here is here because somebody took the time. And you can be that for somebody else. You can do that. I think God is counting on it, actually. And so I pray that God would give you courage beyond yourself, courage beyond any fear you might have, or any sense of inadequacy, to accept the power only God can provide, to realize that we don't have to be strong. God is strong for us. And to use that power to help others resist evil and oppression in all its forms, and to realize that we are so much more than what our lived experience tells us we are, than what other people think we are. We are radiant, because we shine with the Creator's spark within us, every one of us. Amen.